Dave, thank you so much for joining me today on the What is a Good Life podcast. Since making your acquaintance, following your work, and knowing the nature and the what I perceive to be honestly the integrity of your inquiries, I'm really intrigued to see where this conversation goes today.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, glad to be here, and knowing the quality of your questions, I'm looking forward to it.
Well, given we've had a couple of takes at this already, you're more than aware of the first question, which is there a question you're exploring as you move through life?
Yeah. So I guess for the last 10 years, I've been trying to live by a question of how well am I aligned right now with my purpose? As best I understand my purpose in that moment. And right now, today, the more immediate version of that question is, how am I doing? Because I have a sense of a new thing that wants to be brought about. Might look like a new program that I'm involved in with other people, and I have a strong sense that I could mess it up if I get in the way. If I start interpreting it from up here too soon, rather than letting it be what it is, and then me playing catch up and figuring out how to do the sort of implementation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, both components of your response there resonate a lot with me. So intrigued as to, and I'll get back to the kind of the wider alignment in terms of purpose. But can you give me a sense of how you're interacting with that sentiment or that feeling that something is being given birth or giving birth to, and how do I not interfere with it? But I'm assuming how do I participate in life in some way too, or is some sort of
Yeah,
mix between it?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, so I'm tentative around it. It kind of I had a moment of maybe a month or two ago now of forgetting who I was just a little bit. Um, if you're familiar with Bill Plotkin and Animas Valley Institute, their work, Bill was a superb guide for me 10 years ago when I was really trying to figure out what the hell my purpose was. Um, and yeah, he's kind of big on this sense of trying to have a tight focus on whether this thing you're about to get involved in is a thing you could do, a thing you might be quite good at, but is it really yours to do, or could somebody else do it better, or is it actually not that vital? And so that keeps sort of bringing me back to these questions. How I'm approaching this current one is with some trepidation, because it feels like it could be quite important. It feels like it could be a more specific response to these times. And, it kind of arrived in I was saying a moment ago that I had this thing of remembering who I was. I'd got a bit aligned with job titles and kind of, what I appear to the world to be, which is a way of counsel, trainer, facilitator, mentor. And in the way that Bill get his teeth fixed, in the way that Bill Plotkin appears to be a vision fast guide, a wilderness guide, a psychotherapist. Um, but he's actually a weaver of cocoons for transformation, as he says in his books. And I'm some kind of servant to alchemy. Um, and so I'd got a little bit sidetracked, and I was starting to just think, as a way of counsel trainer, what's my next step in my development, in my, for want of a better word, career path? And something punctured that illusion suddenly, and I was brought back to, no, do you remember your vision fast? Do you remember who you really are? And it's just coincidence, if you like, that there's a strong alignment between my true purpose and ways of expressing that in the world and way of counsel. So way of counsel is a terrific vehicle for me to be me. But if I lose track of that subtle distinction between the sort of day job and the reason why, then I could go off down a wrong tangent. So after that being brought back to my true self, this germ of an idea sort of offered itself, and my head kicked in immediately, like it does, and wanted to box it and understand it and define it, and inevitably did so in really quite a small way. And something just kind of said, that's not going to work. This is bigger than that, and you don't understand it yet. So stop acting like you do and take a step back. So there's been a lot of tentative approaches to it. I kind of did some furious journaling when it first showed up, and then I put the journal away for a week or two, and just sort of said, well, I'm here. If you want to knock on my door, if you want to show up in dreams or conversations with people or anything, great. I'll try to be paying attention. I'll try to be listening. But I'm so aware that I've got a tendency to slice and dice things in a nice, logical, structured way, and I have a sense you're much more organic than that. So I'm going to sort of step back. And yeah, I'd get nudges and hints and things in dreams, and possible collaborators. Because when I would come back to it tentatively after a while and do a little bit of journaling again, I'd have these bursts where it would kind of write itself. Ideas would just sort of flow out of me and straight out of the pen as fast as I could write. And the thing was just getting bigger and bigger and richer and more fascinating. But quickly went beyond what I could handle on my own. So it would have a big element of way of counsel, but it's got big elements of at least two other things as well. Two whole other disciplines that are not my field at all. So now there's a kind of listening for who might be the collaborators and how to make those approaches and how the hell to explain it when I don't much understand it myself. Those kind of things are going on at the moment.
You said something there that I think, and based on who I suspect are kind of that may listen, the people that may listen to this. You said something there that I assume may resonate a lot. That notion of, okay, I want to kind of, my mind wants to get involved in this. It's eager to do something, and yet there's an awareness that it's almost too big for it at this point, or it
Mm.
could be a lot bigger than what it could possibly understand.
Mm.
If that's still in any ways fresh for you, could you describe that kind of that experience, or that maybe even tension in that experience?
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I had the best part of 40 years in the tech world, the second half with big corporates. And, I survived day to day and earned my bread by being able to quickly compartmentalize things and kind of bring them under control and say, this is what this is, and this is how we deal with it. And, I was kind of a problem solver for hire in the last 10 years of my career there. So, but I've spent the last 15 years trying to unlearn that reflex, because it kicks in quick. It's as a dyslexic trying to survive in some high profile jobs. That quick analysis, categorization, and then ability to articulate it was a daily lifesaver. It kept the imposter police just outside the door. Um, but I'm trying to unlearn the habit and get back to what my heart and my gut are picking up from everything out there is the really valuable information. And this strangely wired but fairly powerful processor up here is going to be great further down the track. It's going to be really helpful to us in working out the detail of implementation. But until we understand what it is we're implementing, it's just going to be a problem. It's always going to close doors off too soon. It's always going to shrink the thing to make it manageable now. So yeah, because I guess I'm trying to do that in my whole life now. I've decades of operating in a very, I don't mean this in a toxic sense. Hoped I wasn't even going to use that word, but it's a very masculine style, I think. And I was raised in a Northern English working class culture where all of the sort of limited version of that masculine palette was prescribed and encouraged, and anything else was discouraged. So for too long, I've worked with that much too limited palette, and so really trying to rewire how I approach things now, and let imagination. I mean, these are words I couldn't use 15 years ago. Imagination and intuition and crazy things like that from the other side of what it is to be human. Really have a big influence and tend to make the important decisions early on. And then I'm sure it's been said a million times better than me by lots of people, but that sense that this is a terrible master but a good servant,
Yeah.
and the heart, which is so much better at picking up what's really important, is I think, even biologically, scientifically, you would say is sort of designed for that purpose, to be a receptor of all the information that's around us, and to do the first pass of processing on it, and then sends a subset of the information up here for more detailed mechanical style processing. But I think the heart's where it's at these days, which would have got me fired in short order back in the corporate world, But I don't
Yeah.
I don't live there anymore. So
Well, that's some interesting contemplations around that as well that I'd wonder about too, and just the path of showing up. Firstly, with the heart in a corporate setting, it's not my setting anymore, so I can't test it. But just when you mentioned there, earlier you mentioned servant to alchemy, and then you're talking about the heart and the gut, and leading with these things, the idea that the mind can be a useful servant but a terrible master. Can you, and even just the kind of acknowledgement of this sense of alignment and purpose becoming the key focus over the last 10 years or 15 years that you're alluding to, can you give me a sense into just where that began for you, or how how this even began to be something that you'd contemplate?
well, I guess the very beginning, I mean, obviously there's childhood stuff, before modern culture comes and messes you up. I was probably my parents both loved the mountains, right? And I grew up in and around Sheffield, just outside the Peak District National Park. All our weekends were in the national park. I ended up being a rock climber, and I still walk the hills now. So there's always been a connection there, but it really got squeezed right to the margins during the sort of heyday of my tech career. When none of that touchy feely hippie stuff is invited to the party, and you have to leave so much of yourself outside the office. But the narrow get stuff done capabilities were sort of richly rewarded if you could keep doing it and keep accelerating. So there's that long barren period where real me is squeezed into a corner and starved, you know. But there came a day in the corporate world where I'd been tasked with training an entire IT department for a local council, so 100 people. The same 1 day training course, 20 people at a time, every day for 5 days. So just Monday through to Friday, just repeat the same basic training course. And so by Thursday, I was on autopilot. You know, the PowerPoint slides just kept coming. I kept saying the words. You know, I was gone. I was just glazed over. And of course, my whole persona at that time, right, was expertise based. You know, people used to put the initials SME after my name, subject matter expert. People used to call me a thought leader and other things that make me cringe now. But you know, I was very, very specialized, and so that if you put a crack in the idea that I was the expert in the room, ooh, bad things could happen. You know, my entire life could fall apart. My
Yeah,
identity
yeah.
could fall apart. But on Thursday, this person, never met them again. I wish I could shake their hand because they kind of really, really helped me. They asked a brilliant question, just a kind of looking at this thing from a different angle. You know, one of your kind of questions. And I know now, and I really, really wished at the time that I'd been man enough to say, what a terrific question. I have no clue what the answer is. But here we all are. We've got a whiteboard, we've got some coloured pens. The training just got interesting. You know, let's do this. And I, you know, give myself a small pat on the back for I learned slowly, but when I get there, I get there, you know, and I don't tend to regress. When somebody asks me that kind of question when I'm training in way of counsel now, I go, wonderful question. No clue. But between us, I imagine we're going to at least benefit from exploring it, you know,
Yeah.
and that becomes the focus for a while. But instead, back then, 20 years ago, I just spoke fluent consultant bullshit for 10 minutes at this guy. And he just kind of lost the will to live. And I said, does that answer your question? And he nodded meekly. And I carried on with the slides. Got home that night and I couldn't bear myself. I thought, is that what you've become? This completely fake, shiny suit persona. You know, I couldn't stand it. And so I started sort of wandering about like a lost soul, saying the word authenticity to anybody who'd listen. And my wife, who's considerably wiser than I am, pointed me to a training in what used to be called spiritual direction, which is a terrible misnomer. Spiritual accompaniment is better, kind of, you know, the mystical fringes of Christianity. It's a good thing. I think you Irish call it anam cara,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
a soul friend. So there was this course to maybe become a soul friend to people. And on that, I met a guy who just reeked of authenticity. And he'd come back from a fairly profound experience, 5 day men's rites of passage in America. And he wouldn't tell me much about it, which was really intriguing. But he was changed by it. I knew him enough before to see the difference. And that really, really drew me. And it, like I say, he was dripping with authenticity after this thing. So I thought, okay, I want some of that. So a year later, when that program came to the UK, I signed up and had this sort of, you know, crash course in greater authenticity and shrugging off. You know, it's like an onion, peeling an onion. You know, there's lots and lots and lots of layers of not really you versions of the ego. You know, small versions of the ego that are very good at trying to defend themselves. But this was a 5-day crash course in shedding lots of those layers and beginning to touch something a bit more real, and learning how to have more real relationships with other people, particularly in that setting, blokes. And it was also where I met Way of Counsel. There was no kind of fuss made about it. If they mentioned the name of it, that was about as much as they did. There was like a 30-second introduction, and we just did it, which is, it turns out, wisdom when it comes to Way of Counsel. You know, my teachers and elders now always remind me, sort of keep the introduction really short and just start.
Yeah.
Get everybody into counsel, and then counsel will explain everything. Counsel will do the teaching.
Just
But,
in that spirit, and sorry to interrupt you for a second,
mm,
could you give, and I know the irony of me asking this, but just a very, even a sense of Way of Counsel to people if they haven't heard it before?
sure, yeah. So it's a human group practice. It's a circle practice. The circle shape is important because it frees us from hierarchies and any things that we might want to sort of project onto the big chair or the top of the table or any of that. It physically says we're all peers. We mark the center of the circle because kind of magic can happen there, and it's not owned by any of us, but we can all put our stuff there. We have an object, usually called a talking piece or sometimes a talking stick. I've seen many over the years. Sticks, stones. This is one of my personal favorites.
Ah,
Um,
beautiful, a wooden heart.
just, yeah, piece of olive wood from Palestine, given to me by one of the Palestinian trainers over there. Um, and only the person holding the talking piece can speak. Everybody else's job in that moment is to listen like crazy. Just give yourself to really high quality listening, the kind we don't normally get. And so you can either use it as a practice for individuals to do their own kind of healing and growing up and maturing, or you can use it as a community tool. If you live in a intentional community, or you're a charity leadership team, or you're a group that works together in the office, or whatever it might be, a family, anything, community. You can use it for the sort of decision making things, the figuring out our vision, resetting the vision 5 years later, dealing with the inevitable conflicts and tensions that build up between people. So it's what I love about it is that it's like all the real stuff that happens between ordinary human beings. It goes, yeah, I know, and here's how we make that a, a productive thing in council. Does that begin to answer the
Oh,
question?
it does. It
Say much
absolutely
more.
does. I've actually to this book I've got before, The Way
Yes,
of
ebook.
Counsel, by Zimmerman and Coyle. It gave me an introduction to it, and it's one of the reasons why I contacted you before, when we initially spoke. And there's something about even just the essence of how that book is written that I think is it's a strange mix of kind of there's a poetry, like almost a poetic way of having a conversation while being very grounded, while it definitely speaks about the heart and not being
Mm,
pulled off into the distance or beyond mysticism even. But there's also some kind of a nod to in my experience of reading, like it's still so effective. Do you know what I mean? Like
mm, mm,
it's a strange mix of a lot of different things, I would say. And yeah, I find the process, from what I've read about that, and just even just playing with ideas myself from reading it, I guess it's there's something very, I think there's something quite rare about it.
mm. Oh yeah, very much so, very much so. And it's its own thing. I mean, to help people kind of begin to have a frame of reference for it, I said it's a circle practice, and there's lots of those out there.
Mm.
And some of them are a bit lightweight, a bit thin, and they can do certain things, but then they run out of juice. Way of Counsel was developed, but they would probably, Gigi Coyle and Jack Zimmerman would probably say it began with remembering.
Mm.
But this happened in California, 1979, 1980. Joan Halifax, now probably best known as co-founder of Zen Peacemakers. She was the first director of a thing called the Ojai Foundation at this bit of beautiful, wild mountain ridge in California. They built a little center there, and they got people to come from all over the world, all kinds of cultures, all kinds of spiritual traditions, and sit with the question, what makes a life-giving human culture? And so people that were there, like Joanna Macy, the work that reconnects,
Mm.
Thich Nhat Hanh, Vietnamese Buddhist master, um, indigenous elders from the local tribes, First Nation people from that part of what they call Turtle Island, what we call North America. Really, the kind of mix you just would never expect to see those people sitting in the same circle at the same time. You just, some of the photos, there aren't many from that time, but a few of them, they just blow my mind. You've got a Native American Indian guy telling a joke, and there's a Vietnamese Buddhist monk leaning in, and you can tell the translation just hasn't quite kicked in yet. He's going to get the punchline any second now. But he's so rapt, he's so attentive to that guy. So beautiful things happened there. And one of the most profound, and I think one of the most long lasting fruits of that inquiry between all those people was Way of Counsel, which then leaked out into some schools in California, and then into some prisons, and then into some businesses and communities, and then into some other countries, and kind of here we are today. But I should, to sort of try and finish the short explanation of
Yeah.
counsel, just mention the four intentions, because they're really the heart of it, and I think they set it apart from other less profound group practices. The four intentions are to listen from the heart, which is all about presence rather than assessment. So again, this is why, what a crazy thing. What do you mean listen from the heart? My ears are here.
Yeah.
But actually, your electromagnetic field receptor is here. I was raised being told this was a muscle. It was a pump for moving blood around my body. Well, kind of, but 25% of it is neurons, brain cells. There's a lot more going on here. It's constantly emitting an electromagnetic field in all directions that can be read by other creatures, and it's constantly reading all the other electromagnetic fields from all the other beings around. So there's communication going on that this can't understand and isn't directly involved in. So to say listen from the heart is quite a countercultural, profound thing, and it makes a big shift. To be the person who has the talking piece and is being listened to from the heart by, I don't know, 6, 8, 10 people is a moving experience. When you notice the quality and the depth of the listening, I mean, the first thing you notice is that you're not interrupted. And you think, well, that's weird. I don't remember the last time that happened. I can pause for a long time and nobody jumps in. I'm still holding the talking piece. They're still listening. And they'll wait for the right word to finally come to me, and then I'll be able to say what I need to say. So listening from the heart is a beautiful, beautiful gift that we give each other in counsel. Second intention, speak from the heart. When I am holding the talking piece, there's this sense of this isn't ordinary chit chat. This is not in the coffee shop or at the water cooler. So kind of make it count. Say something worth saying, and Instead of going up here and saying, well, what's one of my favorite stories that makes me look cool, quite wise, but also humble, and, you know, and let's trot one of those out again. No, no. Whale Council says, what's alive in your heart right now? Spit it out. Just, just be real, you know? Um, and so, again, a profound thing to speak from the heart and have it witnessed and not fixed. No advice comes, no correction, no judgment. Just it's just received and held, and that's your truth right now. Okay, be my turn in a minute. Here's my truth, and these two sets of truth and these 10 different truths all sit in the center of the circle. And you get ones that, on the face of it, we would say were completely incompatible. Not in council. They just sit there next to each other in the center, and the sky doesn't fall in, and nobody dies. And we're all a bit changed by that experience. The other two intentions: to be lean with our speech, one I constantly struggle with, but I'm an apprentice to it, and to be spontaneous. So again, back to that thing of kind of not rehearsing in your head when you're waiting for the talking piece to come around to you, and not telling those old stories that don't have any juice anymore, but being willing to be surprised by what comes out of your mouth when you finally get the talking piece and you speak. Because those are great insights. You know, when I go, I did not know I was going to say that, there's usually some real teaching for me there. There's some insight into, okay, I thought this was what I was bothered about today, but it turns out underneath that, there's this much more important thing. Or I thought I was over that thing between me and my father, but I noticed I choked up halfway through saying that casual thing about it. So it turns out I'm not over it. Okay, maybe that's what I talk about in this council. I'm going to pause there.
There was no need to as well, though, because there's that was absolutely delightful. Like there's so, and I'd love to go back as well, even to, because I drew you out of the scenario where you were saying how you were getting into this by asking you about the way of counsel, or just how um,
Mm,
purpose and things of that nature. But just what you said there, like the capacity to be listened to by other people's hearts, and even just something I think you said that's so fundamentally important, the capacity not, or the experience of not being interrupted while you're holding the talking stick. So you can actually kind of unmask your own meaning within it. Like that there's space for you to go, oh wow, my throat got a bit tight there when I mentioned that thing.
yeah.
Whereas in the usual day-to-day flow, it's kind of racing to get your point
Mm,
across or
mm,
point in,
mm,
and all the subtlety is kind of in that movement or that pushing out of something. All the subtlety is lost, and even our own capacity to not only just pay attention to other people, but to pay attention to what we're actually saying.
yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. It's a completely different experience of expressing yourself and of witnessing other people being human. Um, I mean, just to pick up the thread, that you kindly brought back of how I'd met this at a men's rites of passage, and we'd use it as a big group together. But every day we'd also break up into these small groups of like 8 guys. And so, at the start of the week, we were complete strangers from all over the country, and the speed at which we got to real depth, sort of telling each other stuff that we hardly told a soul before, and it being okay and it being a shared vulnerability and therefore, really safe. And by the end of the week, we were blood brothers. I mean, that was in 2008. I'm still in touch with one of the guys from that group. Um, so I experienced the real power of counsel at its most simple and basic, with barely any explanation or introduction. Just jump in. Just here's 20% of what counsel is. That'll be enough for you for this week. Off you go. And amazing things happened. So I came home from that 5-day experience and I thought, well, wow, that was amazing. I don't want to lose that stuff. I don't want that to be a one-off in my life that I look back on 10 years later and go, oh yeah, yeah, that was something, wasn't it? I want to keep this juice in my life. So I'd heard on the last day that there were local men's groups that met once a month or something. So I found the nearest team member to me, who I was living in Scotland then, as I do now. Got hold of this guy and I said, so where's my nearest local group? And he said, there aren't any in Scotland yet. I said, well, couldn't you start one? And he went, you could start one. And I went, no, no, no. You were the elder on the thing. I was an initiate. Um, but it was clear that he would, if he took on one more thing, he was going to get divorced. I think was how he put it. So I couldn't wish that on him. So after a little bit of umming and ahhing, I took the plunge and I started this local men's group using Way of Counsel. That's all we had: an outdoor meeting space, a fire, and Way of Counsel. And I sat down with 5 complete strangers, and I went first because I kind of knew I had to. And I kind of knew that if I talked about football or cars, the group was doomed because that's all anybody would ever talk about there. And I didn't want to start a group for that. So instead, I shared something that felt raw and personal and a big risk to take. And then I passed the talking stick. Talking stone. That group had a stone. And held my breath and stared into the fire. And then this next guy went just as deep. And the next guy, and the next guy, and the next guy. And when we closed out the night, one of them said something like, this is the only place I can say this stuff. Can't say it at work, can't say it at home, can't say it at church. But here, I can be that real. So I thought, this is important. We're going to keep doing this. And 16 years later, that group still meets. I moved to a different part of Scotland, 3 hours away. So I had to start another group. And there are now 4 of those groups in Scotland, and maybe a 5th one coming before long. So yeah, it's a really powerful practice, and people say wrongly that men are emotionally illiterate, and I think the truth is men are really quite emotionally illiterate, but they have been trained to not show that stuff in almost all aspects of their life, on pain of almost death. But if you give them a safe space, a space where the punishment does not happen when you say, I'm baffled, I've got no clue today, I'm just lost. Or you say, I'm gutted, or you say, I'm full of joy. My new grandkid just rocked up, and the first time I held him, and you're so happy, tears are pouring down your face, and that in those groups, you don't even need to apologize for crying. You don't even waste time on that, You just go, of course I'm crying. Tears of joy. Who gives a damn? This is a safe place. A safe place to be brave. It's not one of those places that's safe by being timid, but a safe enough place to be brave. But then I found out you could do it with women as well. It's a human thing. It's not a men's group thing. It's a human thing. And yeah, mixed groups, Way of Counsel, amazing. I'm told women's groups using Way of Counsel are amazing. Obviously, I don't get invited to those. Used it in prison, trained a few guys, prison chaplains usually, who've done a lot of counsel in prisons, tough environments, and with people who are not used to that kind of stuff, who have no previous kind of hippie, lycra and yoga kind of experiences to give them any sort of positioning for that. And I love the feedback you get from those people, because it's just so raw, and it shows you the things about counsel that if you're like me and you've been too close to it for too long, you start to miss. You
Right.
picked up on the not being interrupted. I heard a guy just finishing a 4.5-year sentence who'd been in a few weeks of counsel weekly circles, and he was just saying with absolute amazement that thing of not being interrupted. And it really brought it home to me again how incredible that is. Just that by itself is a massive thing and hugely countercultural, and begins to open incredible possibilities. So yeah, I've really learned in the 16 years since I started with it, that it's a powerful practice. It's profound. People like Gigi and Jack 45 years ago did some kind of finessing for the modern times, that sort of said, okay, if you're a community and you need to figure out where to put the new solar panels and no one can agree, okay, we need a particular form of council for that. Might be what we call a spiral council. Um, or, if you've got a real bust up between two people in a community, then you might arrange four chairs in the center. The two protagonists, each of them picks a critical friend, someone who's got their back, but will tell them if they're bullshitting.
Right.
And you pass the talking piece, and you have a wider group of chairs around the outside, the rest of the community as witnesses. All different ways of focusing this powerful tool of counsel on a particular issue or situation. So I think that was a lot of what got developed in the early 80s. And now it's just kind of had 45 years on the road being used, in the Middle East between Israeli Jews and Palestinian Arabs, and white LAPD cops and black community members that they police. The setting, yeah. So there's a beautiful set of videos online from an organisation called Beyond Us and Them, led by my pal Jared Said, and they've got these videos, and you see these, 12 or so big, scary looking dudes in American prison gear, tattooed everywhere. And you sort of look around the cell and you hang on, I'm pretty sure you belong to the Latino gang, and you belong to the African gang, and you belong to the white supremacist gang, and you're somebody else. And you guys are doing counsel together. But it's for real. They've been doing it there 10 years, and so yeah, its ability to um, obliterate othering
Right.
is something that really has my attention, shall we say, in the times we're living through now. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. And even how at the moment you mentioned, the application of this in men's groups, and there's also mixed groups as well that have really caught your attention in doing kind of counsel with them as well. You know, it is kind of staggering though when you just mentioned there the elements that you kind of forget about something, about a practice, and even I don't know about for you, but if you start surrounding yourself with people then that you meet in these places, and it becomes normal to have interruption free conversations.
Mm. Yeah.
And then in some ways, like you find yourself in scenarios where that isn't just part of the culture anymore. It's one of the things that makes me so optimistic about humanity is that if this is our way of communicating right now, i.e., with interruptions non-stop, man, there's so much further we could go if we just start taking a pause.
Mm.
I was so struck by an image popped up in my head as you were speaking of, you know, Dave with the glazed eyes almost, who batters this guy into submission with the 10-minute consultancy spiel and feels drained after it,
Mm.
versus the experience you had in your first meeting that you held, where you're like, well, I could talk about cars and football, but I take a leap, I take a jump, and then the group follows
Mm.
suit. But the risks that you felt
Mm.
involved in that, just out of interest, like what sort of
Mm.
timeline are we talking about between those two moments?
Let's see. It's probably not that long. I guess the crisis of lack of authenticity would have been 2004, 2005, and that first men's group had its first meeting May 2009.
Right. What I find remarkable, and not only just in, having been a part of facilitating some men's groups as well before, but being a participant in all sorts of different kind of groups before as well. And even just how you touched on there, we assume that particularly men mightn't be very emotionally literate. But the capacity of people to step into a space where, it's not even sharing the stories that don't have any juice anymore, and not doing that kind of, here's my biggest story and how are you going to deal with this even though I'm no longer connected to it.
Mm.
It really, that's another thing that leaves me with great optimism, I find, is just
Mm.
the natural tendency or capacity of us to step into some of these experiences and to still feel a simultaneous experience, perhaps of bravery and safe. It's safe. Like,
Mm.
there's something about us as people that I think it just feels to me that we're far more capable in these scenarios than we could possibly imagine.
Yes, yeah. This is it. Again, it goes back to that good advice to just start in
Yeah.
counsel. Um, because people seem to have it somewhere in their bones. It looks, when you observe new people having their first time in way of counsel, to me it looks much more like remembering than
Hmm.
learning. It's my own very first experience of it was just intuitive. It was just kind of, oh yeah, of course. And after the first time the stick passed round, I didn't think about the process anymore, because in a way it was so simple I didn't need to think about it anymore. But also it was so, I felt so at home with it instantly that it became just like breathing. The mechanics of counsel quickly became sort of automatic. Um, and yeah, somehow I kind of felt the 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 depth of the safety. We talk about reading the field, um, which is this picking up on lots of different wavelengths, what's present when you're in circle together. And you'll get maybe a new group of people who are all strangers to each other, and they're putting a toe in the water, and there's a sense that you can do a certain amount of work there, but you're not going to go completely crazy and dive off the high board, because the container's still being built. It's not really settled in yet. But after 11 years in that first men's group, um, I knew I could lean on that container as hard as I liked,
Hmm.
and I'd never put a dent in it. It had absolutely got me and got everybody else. Um, because another thing that I think is quite unusual about way of counsel compared to a lot of modalities is that it invites, requires you to be both facilitator and participant. So it's not like so many things where you rock up with the facilitator's hat on and you're special. And I'm going to give you a lovely prompt and I'm going to watch while you wrestle with it, but I won't be wrestling with it. It's the opposite of that. So you get the chance to be broken open alongside everybody else. Um, and, you know, I used to worry that people would worry if they saw me in bits that the group wasn't held anymore, you know. But over the years, I've come to realize that most people don't seem to have that anxiety. Again, it seems to be something they intuitively know, that the process is really what's keeping them safe. It's not Dave. Um, Back to that service word, when I teach people to be way of counsel facilitators, I like to always include in there somewhere the message that it's not all on your shoulders, you know, um, and you're not that important. you know. So every now and again, I'll get a management consultant come on the training, and they'll say, "So in this situation, how would I ensure that?" And I'd sort of, "You wouldn't. What? But how am I going to control you not? But how do I get the group abandon all those ideas? Just stop leading, stop governing, stop ruling. Take a breath. Your main task is to prepare the space and to come with a strong intention. The men's group outside round a fire, I get there minimum half an hour early, sometimes earlier. I'll bring wood, I'll bring tinder, I'll bring kindling, I'll bring the fire steel. And I'll go there, and as I'm bit by bit, just in a mindful, slow way, sort of setting up the physical space and preparing to light the fire, I'm kind of preparing me. I'm getting, a bit more grounded, a bit calmer, a bit quieter, connect with everything else that's there, the trees, the birds, the stars, if it's that time of year, whatever. And then I'll take a breath, and then I'll strike the spark and light the fire. And, by the time I've reminded the group of the shared agreements and the four intentions and opened the council, most of my work's done. After that, it's council that's doing the heavy lifting, and the wholehearted opting in of everybody else in the circle. I think those are the magic ingredients. If you've got those together, amazing things can happen. Huge risks can be taken. People can really share intense stuff from any part of the emotional spectrum, and it holds, and it's good. And we can go through periods of discomfort. Somebody will bring something, and you're thinking, okay, that's pretty intense. I'm struggling to stay present with that, but it's not all on me. I'm just going to keep breathing and doing my best to listen from the heart. And thank goodness there's 6 other people doing the same. And then it passes, and you see how transformative it was for that person to be able to say that thing and have it witnessed and held and not judged and not fixed.
Yeah.
And then the talking piece moves on, you know?
The not fixing element, I think, is like, I think that's part of the balm or
Mm,
the
mm,
ointment. Like the witnessing with absolute attention and from the heart is, it's staggeringly underappreciated.
mm.
Like,
Yeah,
it's so often I have to tell people, like, I'm not sharing this for the sake of for a solution. I'm just saying that this is presently the experience, and I'm all right with that. Like
yeah,
it's
yeah,
I think we have no idea just how much it does for us just to be witnessed in that process. Um, for you,
yeah.
you mentioned
The
earlier,
agency it gives you.
yeah, yeah, it's
Sorry, go ahead.
no, no, but I think agency is a beautiful word for it. It really is. I'm amazed sometimes how people may, even in what could be considered kind of caring professions, might apologize for an expression of emotion. Um, I think though that there's something about the that people not jumping in to try to to extricate or expedite you from a process.
Yeah.
I think there's something very calming about that. Like,
Mm,
people have seen me in this. They're holding, they're still here. They're still holding me in attention.
mm,
And I know there's something very relieving or connecting about that. And I think
mm,
agency is a lovely way of putting it too.
mm.
Really interested, Dave, from your perspective, when you mentioned earlier on, maybe potentially giving birth to something, the interaction between the kind of mind and, is it my mind, as you mentioned, doesn't know everything. It's more fully known somewhere else. Then, this idea of who am I, and, a servant to alchemy. Could you give me a sense of, just because counsel obviously has had such a profound effect on your life, that distinction you were making between remembering kind of who you are at the core and then this being a part of that. Just
Mm.
intrigued as to what you're kind of pointing to in that sense.
Yeah, I think there's something in there about when I find a vehicle that's a terrific vehicle for me to be my true self. Um, that's great. That you need that. Bill Plotkin calls it a delivery system. If you haven't got a delivery system, then your gift for the people is never going to get to the people. So you come back from your vision fast or however you found it out, um, carrying this gift for the people, and then you just sit in your room with it. But if you find a delivery system, some way of giving the gift, then fantastic. But the danger is the over identification with the mechanism. So that, in that example I mentioned earlier, I was starting to think, how do I become just a more experienced way of counsel trainer? What does an experienced way of counsel trainer do next? You know, there are these sort of standard courses like Counsel 1, the introduction to counsel, Counsel 2, going deeper, Counsel 3, living way of counsel, and others around the side. And I was just sort of thinking, well, I better start figuring out, talk to my mentor, how do I get to the point where everybody's cool with me delivering Counsel 3 training? And then this thing pulled me up short and said, well, is that your path? Because you haven't taken it back to that I forget the name of them, but that tool that carpenters have that kind of tells you whether that joint's square, whether it's true or not. You haven't taken it back to your soul version of that and checked it for alignment, because my my hunch says that's a couple of degrees off. But 5 years from now, those couple of degrees you'll be firmly up a blind alley, and all the juice will have gone out of your life, and you wonder why, and so check the alignment again. And that's when this new thing came and said, well, what if the most valuable thing you can do in this time is to deploy a way of counsel as part of some other thing? And so, there are other people offering way of counsel 3 trainings. Good. That's a good thing. That should be in the world, absolutely. And some other people have got it covered. But maybe you, and maybe you're one of very few people, or the only person who could bring this particular thing. So if you don't, it won't happen. So it's these small degrees of sort of course correction that over time become a really big miss of the target. So that was kind of what was going on in me, and brought me back to this thing, and kind of required. It's actually requiring a lot of things of me. This one required more humility, a real willingness to look at it and say, this is bigger than me. This is quite a bit bigger than me. I might not be the guy on this one. I might be, oh yeah, and Dave. It might be this person and this person and Dave. And and it's gonna require me to be absolutely my best version of me. Absolutely on my A game. And the next realization was, you're not there yet. You aren't together enough to deliver your part of this thing yet. So you've got some more wounds you need to heal. And I'm 65 now, and I've been paying attention at some level for at least 20 years, and I've healed a few wounds, and even in the last 6 months, some big ones going way back. But there was no getting away from it. I was really confronted with this message that for you to be able to handle your end of this, you're going to need a couple more things to be properly squared away. I don't know if you come across it. There's a meme goes around now and again. it usually says lead from the scar, not the wound. And I probably shift it to serve from the scar, not the wound. But the underlying idea is the same. That if you're operating from your wounds that are unhealed, they're going to be dragging you about. It's the tail wagging the dog, and you're going to be all over the place, and you're going to be unwittingly damaging other people. But if you've done the work on that wound and you've harvested any kind of lessons or gifts or powers you can extract from the whole thing, and it's now a scar, so it's deep experience you can call on, then you might be a safe pair of hands, and you've got even more now in your bag of resources to bring to the thing. So yeah, I'm squaring up from another round of healing, and grateful to people like Bill and Dick Schwartz and others for kind of equipping me with some tools for self healing.
I think there's something wonderfully alive about what you're saying there. Not only in terms of, when you mentioned the initial idea of, am I in alignment with purpose? Am I in alignment with who I am? Is this vehicle or tool just, it may be very close to me, bringing me into myself? Is this all of it? Or is this the full expression of it? And this consistent kind of tending to that, and even just during the course of the conversation, how you've pointed to that kind of consistent, almost paying attention or mindfulness, not to just people in groups but to yourself. Like, did my voice wobble, or did my throat feel constrained when I said that? When you're gathering a wood for the fire, and paying attention to the stars or whatever else might be in your vicinity. And this gorgeous movement in life of moving towards authenticity from this experience in talking at someone for 10 minutes instead of saying I don't know, and then the leaps that you're making and other parts of life. And obviously just how foundational Way of Counsel has been in that, in terms of listening from the heart, expressing from the heart, and just this deep kind of inquiry into really just our shared humanity, by the sounds of it, in so many of the things that you're expressing. Given all that we've discussed, Dave, I'm really intrigued to ask you the question of, what is a good life for you?
Mm, mm. Well, I guess you won't be surprised to learn that I think purpose is part of my answer to that question. I lived most of my life so far without any clue about purpose, almost trying to survive day to day. I mean, that's making it sound a bit dramatic, but in those ordinary survival things of, can I get a relationship that's going to last? Can I get a job that brings enough money in, and can I keep it? Um, just the basics that I didn't feel particularly equipped to handle when I was 18, 19. So kind of getting through the next day was always a win, back then. But then to get good at surviving, and that to become stable enough that you can then start to get that impatience for something more, the authenticity gap. And to have the good fortune to stumble across the right books and the right teachers, and have some of the right experiences that, again, they couldn't do it for me. Even the best guides and teachers, all they could do was create the conditions. Bill talks about walking with you up to the wall of flame, and then you have to choose to walk through it. But yeah, finally getting there. The first couple of years after my second vision fast were characterized by a kind of an impatience, a disappointment with myself that it had taken me so long. That I was in my 50s, and a sense that I'd wasted life up until then, and an urgency about trying to find my delivery system and start giving the gift away, which I had to be kind of reined in from, the life had to kind of have a word and calm me down a bit and sort of say, everything till now was not a waste. It's all in the kit bag. This has all been training. And you've got enough time. The universe was not asleep on the job. Spirit was not, didn't overlook you and is now trying to play catch up. It came to you at the right time, so relax and let it flow now, So, so purpose and not just having that sense of what I'm for, but knowing that my day-to-day work is trying to do that, be that in the world. There's huge satisfaction for me in that, incredible fulfillment. Another big thing that has always been in the background, and I choose these days to bring it into the foreground, is remembering my place in nature. Is remembering that I am another animal that's come out of this incredible web of life on this constantly evolving planet, and to really unlearn the 70s industrial mindset I was raised with, and to go, wow, I'm here, I'm part of this. This is incredible. To be sitting by the mountain stream that comes down by the house in the morning for an hour just, changes everything. And to get calm enough and quiet enough that I become part of the place. And, birds will kind of fly over my shoulder. And I once had a fox come all the way down one side of the glen, cross the burn, up round the other side of the glen behind the oak tree, and get within 20 feet of me. And I could, out of the corner of my eye, because I wasn't looking at him, because in my experience, foxes are the most sensitive beings to being looked at. They know if you look at them like a predator's eye, focus on them, they go, "Oh, you're looking at me." But just keeping my gaze where it was and just tracking him out of the corners of my vision was just joyful. And he got to this point where he was kind of like, do you know, some of my senses are saying there's a human sat on a rock in the middle of the river, but I'm not picking up any bad vibes. And I can't quite compute it. And I'm just going to jog on. Moments like that are just wonderful. And and to get past that thing we do these days often of just consuming nature again, but as a well-being thing to consume. Here I'm trying to participate. I plant trees and I rescue oak saplings from being eaten by sheep. And, I'm trying to be part of the process. Yeah, and even on the days when all I can do is breathe out near that oak tree, because my out breath is its in breath, and its out breath is the oxygen I need. Yeah. What else? What else? Relationships. The first thing that went right in my life, really, I think, was falling in love with Lynn 47 years ago. We're still together and still in love. That, I can't tell you how big that is. None of the stuff we've talked about today could have happened without her first believing in me. Yeah, just foundational. So yeah, the best relationships you can manage, and they're tricky beasts, and some of my close family relationships today are not where I want them to be. They're really not. And there's sorrow around that, and there's hope that they'll come right. But there's definitely a sense of how important they are to me. Is that some kind of answer?
Yeah, that's gorgeous. I was just
Hell of a
thinking when you were
question.
describing whether it was yourself and nature, or even just that connection with Lynn, like that it was just, I don't know, most of this conversation has just felt very soothing on my heart. And so, yeah, that was more than enough of an answer, Dave. And look, thank you so much for all the insights and the anecdotes and experiences, and for joining us today on the What Is a Good Life podcast. It yeah, as I said, it was just something that was very soothing on me. So I very much appreciate that.
Thank you, Mark. It was an absolute pleasure, and yeah, thank you for your skillful and effortless guiding through the thick undergrowth, which is Dave talking.
Cheers, Dave.